Hi guys, it's Kathy. I hope you're doing well. If you were just in my stream, I accidentally hit the intro for the outro. I had to run to the ladies' room really bad and I misclicked. It happens. Apparently a lot to me. At least I'm not muted right now. Alright, so today for OJ, we're going to take a field trip. We're going to not see the trial at all today. Because we're going through this trial and they keep showing evidence, pictures and gloves and hats and socks and everything. They're showing all this evidence and we can't see it because, it's blocked from us. So what we're going to do today is I have a video that just shows the evidence of the trial. We're going to watch we're going to see all the evidence right now. I haven't watched this, so if it's terrible, then I'll just close it and OJ is ready to go. But I think it'll be interesting. I think we need to see it. If we're going to be the jury and we're going to make our own decision, we need to see the evidence. So, here we go.
To try and get a plea bargain going before Johnny Cochran got in the case, because the only way he was going to stay in control. To the point where one day I'm in the courtroom with Bob Kardashian, and he's worked out a deal to plead OJ and send Kardashian to jail.
Hello, my name's Dave Emery, and in this half-hour segment, you're going to hear a conference-called interview recorded on October 13th, 1996, with three different authors. First of all, you'll be hearing Donald Freed, who, along with Raymond Briggs, is the co-author of a book called Killing Time, published in hardcover by Macmillan. And also, you will be hearing from Stephen Singular, who is the author of a book called Legacy of Deception, published in softcover by Dove Books, copyrighted 1995. And also Stephen Worth, who, along with Carl Jaspers, authored the book Blood Oath, subtitled The Conspiracy to Murder Nicole Brown Simpson. That book was published in softcover by Rainbow Books and copyright 1996. All three of these authors have developed information indicating that O.J. Simpson did not commit the killings that most people believe that he committed, but in fact, the case has been misrepresented by the media and mishandled by the authorities. Among the many tantalizing details that you'll hear in the upcoming two half-hour segments concerns the fact that the grand jury would not indict O.J. Simpson. They did not vote to indict O.J. Simpson, something the media has not brought us. This interview is one of several interviews that I will be having with these authors. And again, there will be a free flow of discussion. I have a few things that I interject during the course of this particular interview, but by and large, it is these three authors sharing information with themselves. This program was recorded at my home base station, KFJC-FM in Los Altos Hills, on the evening of October 13th, 1996. Veteran listeners to this program will also eventually be hearing interviews with these three authors. I recorded two interviews, each consisting of two half-hour segments, on November 24th of 1996 as well. Those of you who have been listening for a long time know that I used to produce long series of programs. These interviews are not intended as a series and do not comprise a series. Rather, they are separate, standalone interviews that will, however, provide an incremental understanding of the O.J. Simpson case. However, they are meant to be aired alone. We're going to proceed now with the first side of this interview. Again, this is Donald Freed, Stephen Worth, and Stephen Singular, recorded on October 13th, 1996.
It's hard to figure out what's going on, but I think this is where they found the glove.
I wonder if you could comment on the treatment
Glove.
of the media in this case, and also the treatment that each of you
Glove.
three have had, or in some cases, as is the case with Stevens, Worth, and Singular, the non-treatment.
Well, I'd like to start
Grass.
by saying Donald Freed has done a great job. I've been watching him on television for the past couple of weeks. I have only seen a couple of performances, but
I don't know, Debbie.
he really stood in the fire with Fred
I was
Goldman,
wrong.
whenever that was, a couple of weeks ago.
That was not where they
That's
found the
really
glove.
the first time that I've ever seen anybody challenge Fred Goldman's
man, there's the glove.
assumptions about this case. Somebody needed to do
A
it.
glove.
Donald did it.
I don't know.
He
I have
kept
no
his
idea.
cool. He did it in a very good way. And then on
Wow.
the other program with Charles Grodin, in which for the first time you had two authors sitting there trying to present some actual evidence to people other than a lot of opinion and gossip. Donald again had the temerity to take on Joseph DeGenova, who for 2 years has basically run his mouth about this case without anything really substantial to back it up.
Stephen,
I thought it was an admirable performance, and I
We
send
want to
him
see
my
the.
kudos.
who is Mr. Jed?
We're gonna see the picture if we look hard, where they're stepping over Ron's body, and where there's the latex gloves that someone took off and threw on Ron's body.
DeGenova.
He's one of the regulars on the Geraldo Rivera show. I think he's connected to Victoria Tensing, who's another regular. And in fact, I think they're married. I could be wrong about that.
They are, and they're former government prosecutors,
Right.
well-known Republican activists who have found a berth on the Geraldo and Grodin. Let me greet my colleagues tonight, and let me ask them. They are
Footprints in the blood right there.
Have done
See
the
it?
definitive work, especially on Mark Furman, and with that plea bargain coming in just a few days ago, I think it would be extremely interesting to hear both of them talk about the meaning of that plea bargain.
Okay, gentlemen.
Well, it's an interesting thing. I was just watching Bugliosi today. I don't know whether it was a repeat or it was live with Grodin, but they're like forgiving this guy like he did nothing. And I think the N-word was the tip of the iceberg. People forgetting this fella's beliefs. The fact that, at least we uncovered, unless somebody can refute it, that when he said he was at La Quinta, California, on that day at 8 o'clock, he wasn't.
Could you explain, Stephen, the significance of that in the context of the O.J. Simpson case for the audience?
Sure, and Marcia Clark was, when he first got on, Marcia Clark was asking him, where was he on 8 o'clock on June 12th? And he very calmly said he was at La Quinta, California, attending a police league. I think he was a delegate there. And he had left just prior to a barbecue. And then he drove, which is about 2.5 hours to his house, got home and went to sleep, and then was awoken to go to the scene. The problem is there was no barbecue on Saturday night. I should say on Sunday night. It was on Saturday night. Now, why they would establish this time sequencing is beyond me. But what seems to have come out, Joe Bosco writes about, a time, I think, the other night, Stephen Singler talked about this phone call at around 2:53. Was that right, Stephen?
That's correct.
From the Rockingham area. In Garden's book, unless he's made a giant error, he said that Van Atter and Lang were there at 2:20 in the morning. Now, everybody kept saying that Furman couldn't have done anything because there were 17 officers around. Well, apparently, maybe he got there a lot earlier, and so did those other detectives, because for some reason nobody kept notes except Furman, which is kind of strange.
Right. With all due respect, to Diane Sawyer, and I guess it's ABC Television, and she was the one who interviewed Furman, I believe it was last Tuesday on national television. I think by focusing solely or exclusively or particularly on race, you play into the hands of Mark Furman, and that's basically what was done on that television show, which I again feel that he controlled very subtly for his own ends. It's very easy for him to stand up and make an apology and say it from the bottom of his heart and beat his breast a few times and go to a commercial. If someone had been interviewing him who was familiar with the evidence and who could have walked him through his preliminary hearing testimony step by step and what he said at that time in his own words, and then proceeded from there to other aspects of evidence, you could have gotten beyond the race issue for the first time. Talking exclusively about race only serves his purposes because it takes it all.
Okay. All right. So here we go. Here's the pool, right? Is that the is okay. That is definitely a pole, but I thought no, the pole has to be the neighbor's pole, right? Because this is OJ's house right here, and this is the cabanas or anything, or where his daughter and Kato were staying, right? This is his house. So this right here has to be his pole. That has to be a neighbor's pole. So that's what I don't understand. Here's the street, right? If this is if this is the pole and this is Kato's, then the glove was found way back here, and to me it sounded like the street was right outside of Kato's house. There was a big fence. Someone jumped over the fence, slammed into his wall, and left the glove there. This doesn't make sense at all. I wish we could have seen when they were pointing, because this picture, this is the streets right here and here. There's the Bronco. Well, okay, we'll just keep playing.
Off of the evidence, and it's the evidence in this case that will open the door to the other aspects of it.
One of the aspects of this case that I've noted for my audience ever since the murders occurred and the investigation, or perhaps alleged investigation, began was that this case, in its external circumstances, or what we were told by the prosecution and sadly the media, which have been almost coterminous in this case, this corresponds to a T to the most pejorative and oldest racist stereotype in this country's history, that of the hyperlibidinous.
Okay, is this a street right here? If this is a street right here, then this looks like a driveway to this person's house. This is O.J. Simpson's house. There's the pool. There's where Kato and the daughters live. And this is where the glove was found, right here. How? Someone must have walked the whole way back this way to jump over to put the glove there. Let's just go with O.J. Simpson as the killer. Let's just go with that. He walked the whole way over here to put the glove. I thought the walkway was here. Okay, so there's a walkway right here. No, I don't think so. I think this is the house right here. So, how did the glove get here? How did the glove get the whole way back here? None of that makes sense. It doesn't make sense. Why would the glove be back there? There's the Bronco. He pulls up the Bronco. He doesn't park right. Yeah, here's the pool. This is the main house, and these are the pool houses here. So how did the glove get over right where my mouse is? How did the glove get there? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. I don't understand.
This hyper-aggressive black male lusting after possessing and destroying the white female. And sadly, this archetype, this racist archetype, has been dominant so far in the dialogue.
Well, that's well put. It's superimposed over a chaotic crime scene that was as hosed down and destroyed, except for the back gate, apparently. I'd like to say to Steve, singular, and to others who are listening in this first generation now of analysis of this great murder mystery, is that the Joe Bosco book, A Problem of Evidence, gives a dramatic confirmation to one of the centerpieces of Legacy of Deception, and using separate sources. Obviously, I think that's a fair statement to say. Isn't it, Steve? Separate sources arriving at the strong indication that Furman left the Bundy murder scene early in the morning hours, before 3 o'clock, and went to the Rockingham estate, and may have there, and I believe this may be new, and tell me if I'm right, Steve, planted the glove first in the Bronco, only to move it later to behind Kalen's guest house. Am I right so far?
That is not something my understanding is that it got inside the Bronco, but I could not say when.
And
That would be total. That would be new. What you're saying.
And did you find it interesting in Stephen Worth? Have you had a chance to read Joe Bosco's book?
Okay, let's go with that then. The cops planted it. Why would they plant it way back at the pool houses? Because that could possibly just point to someone else, like Cato. Why wouldn't they plant it where OJ always is? OJ's not going to walk the whole way back there. Why would he?
Yes, I've read his book and was quite pleased with the information he came out with. I've done some analysis of a photo that was in Darden's book. As a matter of fact, provided it to the defense. In fact, they've now found some new prints from the photo I blew up. What was most interesting of that photo is there seems to have been two photo shots taken, like the whole photo scene with Mark Furman pointing at the glove.
Yes.
Except they moved the glove.
I'm obsessed with this baby powder.
And along with that, moved the envelope. The envelope has footprints on it.
Yes.
Which never appeared, at least for the FBI. But not only that, when they moved the envelope, they moved the leaves along with it, which meant there was they intended to, I would say, defraud the people. I mean, what they did was they moved it so that people wouldn't realize that the envelope had been moved. Very, very strange. And the fact that there's Nicole's blood on the bottom of Ron Goldman's sneaker, along with his own, means he had to step in Nicole's blood, which eliminates what Marcia Clark was talking about. Her whole theory of Nicole being first knocked out, then slitting the throat of Goldman, then coming back to Nicole.
I see.
It just doesn't fly.
Now, Stephen Worth, this is information that's new to me. Where does your information come from?
Okay, well, the information comes from a diligent reading of the depositions and the transcripts.
I don't know anything about
that. It's the most confusing
set
of information I've ever seen.
That absolutely makes sense.
The boots are evidence item 78. And what they gave the implication was they took a drop of blood off of the boot. But it wasn't a drop. What they actually says they scraped one little drop off the bottom. But they also said they took a mixture of Nicole Brown Simpson's blood and Ron Goldman's off the sides, the edges. So that no longer is just something off a knife. He had a step in it. But there are also footprints that don't seem to appear on any photos. Something else that I've noticed, I haven't seen or found anywhere in the transcripts where they show footprints and blood prints, or the blood spots, so that they're definitively to the left of the shoe prints. I haven't seen that anywhere. I think they all saw a footprint and then a blood print, like 112, 113, 114, 115, and then these footprints, but nothing ever showing them in one picture.
That's very interesting.
That's what it sounds
Extremely interesting. This civil trial will depend on the forensics to a much greater degree, and so work that you've done may enter in. I know that their defense is aware of the March 9th, 1995 examination that's in Stephen Worth's book, wherein Furman misrepresents and lies about his whereabouts on the day and the night of the murder. And then with Joe Bosco's book, confirming, giving a second source to the most sensational assertion ever made in the case,
behind Cato's
which
house?
first appeared in Legacy of Deception. This is a remarkable development.
No,
if we
I don't know where we are.
News, of course, we don't. But nonetheless, the record is kept. The accounting is being kept. And I'd like to ask both gentlemen to comment on what I think is the journalistic coup of the case, and that is the revelation by Joe Bosco that the basically white, wealthy
Right
grand
here.
jury
Yep.
of Los Angeles was not going to indict O.J. Simpson.
This is new to me, and I'm astounded again if the two Stevens could comment on that.
Well, I mean, I think it's what they did is any intelligent person looking at the so-called evidence would have gone the same way. I mean, there's no mountain of evidence when you get those police officers getting up there, changing their line, and they can't remember what they did before. 15 minutes before they can't remember, and they didn't take any notes. Well, the smarter or the higher the IQ, let's say, of individuals, and the higher the reasoning ability, the quicker they catch on. And it took, I guess, only a day or so for them to say they were not going to indict. Not on first-degree murder.
In terms of basic forensic evidence, you have no murder weapon, no witnesses, no, I guess, fingerprints, shoe prints that were any match to Simpson at all. And the other thing is that when did the blood appear in the Bronco? I mean, what was the grand jury told? Some of that blood was turned up in August.
That's
so
right.
you may have had a few blood drops on the ground over at Bundy that had not been DNA tested. You didn't have much evidence to go on, and as Donald Fried and I have talked about in the past, it was not just the grand jury, it was people inside Garcetti's office, in particular one Peter Bozanich, who worked right under Garcetti, who came to him and said the same thing.
Yeah.
You need more evidence before you go ahead and try to indict O.J. Simpson and try and bring him
Those
to
are
trial.
long socks.
So and Mr. Bozanich, as many of us now know, was promptly gotten out of the office and demoted to Compton, another neighborhood in Los Angeles. So there were grumblings on all sides. One of the things that Bosco talked about on television that I'd certainly never heard and I was fascinated by was that he said Marcia Clark was known within the district attorney's office as the person you called when you had a problem with evidence, which of course is the name of his book, A Problem of Evidence.
What does he mean by that, Stephen?
He meant that when you've got a problem, there were probably numerous district attorneys or assistant DAs or deputy DAs that you might get a hold of, but that she was the one whose number you reached for first, meaning that it would,
Old
I'm
DNA,
extrapolating
guys.
here, let's be
Love
clear
it.
about
I
it,
love
but
it.
the clear understanding I had was that it would no longer be a problem.
That's right.
And that Phil Van Adder promptly called her and said, and this I believe is the morning of June 13th, Marcia, we've got a problem with evidence. And what he meant, now I don't know beyond that, but that's a pretty stunning revelation right there.
Donald, when you were on with Joe Bosco, when you were in Chicago and on the Groden show, at the end of the show, did Joe Bosco not say that Mark Furman had been with Nicole Brown Simpson in Aspen, Colorado?
Yes, he did. He did say that.
He did?
I believe that he did, yeah.
You see, I was
Stuart
in
just
Chicago
saying
in a
things.
broom closet.
They're just saying things.
So please tell me what I missed.
I tried to get in touch with Joe Bosco through his publicist because I could swear. And it was just at the end, and of course, nobody said anything. I have not heard a word about it since.
One of the things that is in the book I wrote, and I admit that it really doesn't go anywhere, but I was told early on there was an Aspen connection to the crime, and I sort of put that in, and I again acknowledge I wish I could have done more with it. What I was always interested in was getting a hold of phone records, because without subpoena power, that's a fairly hard thing to do. I suggested it to the defense numerous times, to Carl Douglas, and as far as I know, it was never done. I think phone records would have helped establish a lot more about that relationship, and some of them may have connected into Aspen.
Well, I spoke to McKenna, and I said, had they ever gotten a hold of Nicole Brown Simpson's cell phone? Because cell phone, even if you call locally, would have, something would have come up. And, with all of the talk of Mark Furman supposedly being Nicole's private cop, is it possible that she had spoken to him about watching out for her?
Stephen Worth, who is McKenna?
McKenna is the private investigator, along with Pavlik. that works for the defense team.
Okay.
And in
He's
particular,
in
he was
West Palm Beach.
associated with F. Lee Bailey quite
Yes.
a bit. Yeah.
David, a little further on this grand jury.
Yes.
This was a runaway grand jury, unheard of in modern Los Angeles. The grand jury that would normally indict a ham sandwich, as the joke goes. They were deadlocked 11 to 11. They would not indict any more than the mock juries or the focus groups before whom the evidence was placed, so that no group ever submitted this case has ever voted a guilty or an indictment or to bind O.J. Simpson over. And so to persist in saying that it's race that voted not guilty rather than a lack of evidence is a no completely exploded by Bosco's bombshell. And remember that his source is Peter Bosanic, a director in the district attorney's office at the highest echelon.
Right.
One of the things that you discuss in your book, Don, and is also brought up by Stephen Singular in his book, Legacy of Deception. By the way, we should mention, perhaps for the audience, that Stephen Singular's book, although sadly underpublicized by Dove Publishing, has at least had sort of a secondary life by being actually written about in some of the other books that have come out of the case, because your book proposal, Stephen, was actually a part of the investigation and the defense.
Well, I mean, the whole history of the book proposal, which I don't even pretend to know. I think if we knew more about it, I think it would.
Because O.J. killed them and then got into his Bronco and drove home while he was still bloody.
Would shed light on this whole case. I really believe it played some role in the prosecution bringing in the FBI to test for EDTA, because they knew that's what the defense was up to. They made a big thing about it in front of Judge Ito, said we're going to run these tests, we're going to get the definitive results, we're going to prove there's no preservative in that blood, we're going to determine once and for all it was never planted. They ran their tests, they did their due diligence, and they never called their witnesses.
One of the things that Donald Freed alluded to earlier was and that you have written about, Stephen Singular, was the rapid breaking down of the crime scene. Everything was hosed down the day afterward, with the exception of the back gate, in which a blood sample was lifted weeks later, and what perhaps we could nickname in terms of the O.J. Simpson investigation, the back gate.
Right. I mean, just a cursory glance at the crime scene would lead you to believe there was a lot of blood to pick up and test there. And, you know, I mean, we all those of us who followed the case closely know that there was great dispute about blood that didn't match any of the three principles. And the defense spent a lot of time trying to get that in.
Photo I blew up, which I sent to Blazer.
What's that?
It has, first off, the glove, which is evidence item 37, never went out for DNA testing. It was type O. They didn't get a subtype on it, which means 45% of the United States could have, left the blood on that.
Now, this is the blood on the glove that was found
at Bundy.
Bundy.
But miraculously, there's no blood on the hat, which is sitting right next to it underneath plants that are covered with blood.
No, type O. OJ is what type?
Oh, he's AB, I think.
So this was not OJ's. Was it? Could it have been Nicole's or Ron's?
It couldn't. No.
So
the only one who it could have been would have been Ron Goldman. But you would think, for exculpatory reasons, they would have done a total test. But not only that, the entire area around the glove has got blood drops the size of about a quarter. And they never tested any of those blood drops either.
Is that right?
They claim there's in fact, I think Bosco talks about some of the blood drops, maybe they tested it and never gave the information out.
Back just a second to the whole question of EDTA and what I've termed back gate under the circumstances. It is not only strange that the crime scene was washed out and yet this blood sample was lifted weeks later, but one of the things that your investigation, Stephen Singular, brought to the attention of, or at least attempted to bring to the attention of defense and prosecution, was the whole question of EDTA. Could you develop that?
Well, I just went there early on in early August of '94, and I said, we can all argue about this case, but it's come to my attention that if you will simply take the blood that is O.J. Simpson's, identified as O.J. Simpson's blood, And if you will test it for a preservative, you will get a definitive answer about whether this came out of his body on the night of the crimes or whether it came out of a test tube which has a preservative, or more particularly an anticoagulant in it, called EDTA. I did a lot of research into EDTA. I put the defense onto that and hooked them up with some people who were much more knowledgeable about it than I was, so they had the scientific background. And I really believe to this day that the great hole in this whole situation is that we were never able to get a definitive answer on all of that blood. On the particular cases of the case of the socks in the bedroom, virtually everyone has now conceded that there was EDTA in that blood on those socks. So that's that. What I wanted to get to were the 5 blood drops at the Bundy crime scene. That, to me, is the core evidence that would have convicted Simpson or acquitted him.
So go ahead, develop that.
If that's his blood and it came out of his body, that would be very hard to explain. If that's his blood that was sent off to Cellmark and there's EDTA in it, I think the case is blown. I mean, there is no case. That's the critical evidence in this case.
That concludes this particular side. You've been listening to an interview with Stephen Worth, the co-author along with Carl Jaspers of Blood Oath, subtitled The Conspiracy to Murder Nicole Brown Simpson, published in softcover by Rainbow Books, copyright 1996. Another of the speakers has been Stephen Singular, who is the author of Legacy of Deception, published in softcover by Dove Books, copyright 1995, and Donald Freed, along with Raymond Briggs, the co-author of Killing Time, published in hardcover by Macmillan and copyrighted 1995. This interview was recorded on October 13th, 1996. There will be a continuation of this interview in the next half-hour segment. My name's Dave Emery. Thanks for listening. Hello, my name's Dave Emery, and in this half-hour segment, we're going to continue with a conference call interview recorded on October 13th, 1996, between, first of all, Stephen Worth, the co-author along with Carl Jaspers of Blood Oath, subtitled The Conspiracy to Murder Nicole Brown Simpson, also Stephen Singular, the author of Legacy of Deception, published in softcover by Dove Books, copyright 1995. By the way, Blood Oath was published in softcover by Rainbow Books and copyright 1996. Also, Donald Freed, along with Raymond Briggs, the co-author of Killing Time, published in hardcover by Macmillan, copyright 1996. All 3 authors have developed very compelling information that O.J. Simpson, in fact, was framed and did not kill the people, did not commit the murders that he is commonly supposed to have committed, despite the fact that the grand jury, the L.A. County grand jury, would not indict O.J. Simpson, and despite the fact that a criminal jury, in the criminal case, acquitted O.J. Simpson. We're going to pick up the interview where we left off in our previous half-hour segment. So this is the interview with the Stevens Singular and Worth and Donald Freed. One of the things you point out, Donald Freed, is that some of the blood drops supposedly from O.J. Simpson do have EDTA and some of them do not. Now, Stephen Worth, in your book, Blood Oath, your anonymous informant, codenamed Skinner, maintains that part of this cause, white supremacist organization and strike team that, according to your informant, performed the crimes, basically had at their disposal a blood and DNA specialist who had obtained a sample of O.J. Simpson's blood from Cedars-Sinai Hospital, where he had gone for surgery, and you theorize about the possibility that that individual may have been Stephen Colburn, an acquaintance of Timothy McVeigh. We should note that Colburn has not been charged with any crime.
No, Colburn went to jail for possession of a gun, was picked up in Timothy McVeigh, Oklahoma bombing investigation. He was a DNA specialist there. Coincidental, he happened to be a DNA specialist at the same place that he possibly would have access to the blood. But there's other sources for the type of testing they did. There's Arnell, who went to the hospital very frequently, and Jason. They could get any of their blood. See, there's a lot of strange things that occurred. There was a phone call that Donald Freed talked about in his book, that Joe Bosco talked about, the phone call of some woman calling before the murders were discovered.
Yeah, we mentioned that briefly.
Okay, now somebody had to know that there were murders occurring. That's number one. You got a watch stopped at 10:03. For some reason, never used in evidence. Now, barking dogs, squealing dogs, hopping dog, I don't care what you want to use. I mean, you would sooner rely on a crystal or a watch stopped. Now, Donald Freed talks about it in his book, and it was talked about in some newspaper articles that never used. Now, the only assumption that can be made is somebody purposely stopped the watch at 10:03, not realizing it gives O.J. an alibi because he's making 2 cell phone calls to Barbieri at 10:01, 10:02, and you can't be killing people, and at the same time. So you got that. You've got these thumps on the wall. Nobody has explained the thumps on the wall. Without those thumps, there is no way that Mark Furman ever goes around to the back of the house.
Right.
I mean, they can make any kind of excuse. No, but now, if people say, well, the thumps didn't occur, he's got, Cato Kalem's got a witness to that. I shouldn't say, he told his girlfriend on the phone that night about the thumps. So the thumps had to have occurred unless the 2 of them were in. And then what rational reason would they have to, come up with those thumps? So you've got somebody pre-planning. It's the only way that makes any sense. Someone pre-planning this. Now, there's also a blue jacket, a denim jacket, that Risky talks about in his testimony that's inside Nicole Brown Simpson's house.
Now, who is Lipsky?
Risky was the first police officer that came to the scene. He was the one, he testified about keeping the same...
Go ahead with this.
Excuse me?
Go ahead, this is interesting.
Yeah, keeping the scene pristine. And he talks about a blue jacket, and they were wondering, did that belong to Ron Goldman or Nicole? Now, if that belonged to Ron Goldman, the whole case changes. They never talk about it. The defense never brings it up. It kind of just flops right there. Now, nobody, what's even stranger, none of the fingerprints that you would have expected, including the fingerprints that Joe Bosco talked about, that Dr. Lee said were he saw on the eyeglasses. And remember, Dr. Lee couldn't do anything. They could only examine. They could not do anything to that envelope case with the eyeglasses. He said he saw a partial fingerprint. That never was one of the 17 fingerprints that Aguilar talked about when he testified. Nor did he testify about the fingerprint found on the back gate that Furman talked about.
What's something I wanted to ask you about, Donald, and I've been an admirer of your work for quite some time, and that concerns, and this might seem a little weird or sort of a leap in terms of the O.J. Simpson case. In your book, Death in Washington, that you co-authored with Fred Landis, it's a book about the assassination of Orlando Letelier in Washington, D.C. It's also about the destabilization of the Allende regime in Chile by our intelligence system. You specifically discuss Operation Centaur, the destabilization of the Allende regime, and one of the things that you talk about in the book is the psychological warfare and media component to that destabilization. And you and your co-author Fred Landis described the subjective reaction of someone who had been in Chile during this destabilization as almost producing a sickening kind of feeling. Could you tell us briefly about Operation Centaur, the media and psychological warfare aspects of that, and also something called the quartered man? One of the central features in that program, in that destabilization program and psychological warfare program, was something called the decarcidado, or the quartered man.
Yes, that's a shrewd observation. When you talk about psychological warfare as an extension of armed violence of foreign policy, such as in Chile, Indonesia, Guatemala, and elsewhere over the past period, you're talking about manipulation of the media in a certain way that goes beyond propaganda. Propaganda is simply slanting information and planting stories. But when you take the next step, then you are into the realm of the non-rational. And that is the realm of monsters, of El Descuartizado, the quartered man, of the various, in Indonesia it was the alligator with the open jaws. Communism was equated during the Cold War with a series of nightmarish images which struck at the psychosexual roots of identity. And the aim was not to create anti-communism. Anti-communism was the aim of propaganda. The aim of psychological warfare was to create madness and bloodshed.
And what was the quartered man?
Well, the quartered man was someone was found murdered, but it was then turned into a monster by the press that was seen all over the country like a Frankenstein monster, and so people thought they were buying human flesh at the market and so forth. Little by little, the country was driven into a nervous breakdown. Now, in this case of the Simpson case, what you have are the preconditions. When you have Time magazine demonizing a photograph, when you have the New York Times whitewashing an absolute fascist such as Mark Fuhrman, when you have ABC, you have the components. I'm not suggesting now that you have the mighty Wurlitzer of the CIA coordinating a hydra-headed octopi of psychological warfare.
By the way, the mighty Wurlitzer is a term applied by former Deputy Director of Central Intelligence Frank Wisner to the CIA's media component. Go ahead.
Yes, you have the frame of reference, all right, David. But what you have are the components here, and when the Washington Post puts out a boilerplate story that says, in effect, conspiracy theory of cocaine what they start out with the story about the CIA cocaine story of Los Angeles, but then on the jump sheet and from then on, the word conspiracy appears again and again and again. Conspiracy being the C word that communism used to be. You have the precondition here, and you've always had it, for what happens under fascism, where you move from rational propaganda over to the non-rational. That's what's to watch for. That's everything short of that is still propaganda. When it moves beyond that into the non-rational,
all you're saying is propaganda,
then you are in a different situation. But I would like to say that to those who follow the content analysis of the media,
Hold on, I'll go
certainly
back.
those who follow David Emery, who always has this dimension to the stories, because that's the without that, the jump sheet, and from then on, the word conspiracy
right here
appears again
there.
And again.
I'm at the socks on the floor. Yeah.
And again, conspiracy being the C word that communism used to be.
Immaculate room, except for socks.
You have the precondition here.
And the socks are like in the middle of the floor. So, like, okay. You sit down on your bed, you take your socks off. You're going to, like, just throw them over to the middle of the floor. You don't put them, like, beside the bed or over where you put your other dirty laundry or anything. You're just going to take your two socks and put them in the middle of the floor. No.
You've always had it for what happens under fascism, where you move from rational propaganda over to the non-rational. That's what's to watch for. That's everything short of that is still propaganda. When it moves beyond that into the non-rational, then you are in a different situation. But I would like to say that to those who follow the content analysis of the media, and certainly those who follow David Emery, who always has this dimension to the stories, because that's the without that that's the mirror we have to hold up to reality. The Darden book, the Bosco book, both in their way now, from separate sources, confirming the Stephen Singular book, so that you now have a way to deal with the blood evidence. There is a process here we're talking about. And if you put that on one side and the timeline on the other side, you begin to have a dialectic to deal with this, and now you can confront the racism directly. It just takes a lot of courage, a lot of stamina, but luckily, all three of you have it, even though I am leaving. Because
Donald, one point I wanted to put before we bid you a fond farewell here, and that is again, in reading Death in Washington and about the quartered man and about the psychological warfare program in Chile, in which the public was obsessed with these images of mutilation, and this in turn was used to imply that society was unstable. They needed a change. They needed a strong man to put a halt to all of this uncontrolled, violent, sickening chaos. And the subjective accounts of people who had experienced this, they said they were almost physically sickened. It reminded me of at least my own reaction to the media blitzkrieg, and I use that term advisedly, vis-a-vis the O.J. Simpson case. I wonder, and again, if you think I'm full of beans, don't hesitate to tell me, but I wonder to the extent to which we might consider the murder of Nicole, and consider her perhaps, under the circumstances, the quartered woman, la decapitada.
Well, you know, after all, in Stephen Worth's book, its great credibility is that Mr. Worth introduces his own critical reasoning into it. He tells the reader how far he can vouch for any given thing. He does his own independent research, which is flawless in terms of the neo-fascist movements in this country and their recent history, which, interestingly enough, hooks up with the now, I think, famous book of Stephen Singular's about the murder of Mr. Berg. So you have that, and you do know that from the ancillary material of the Turner Diaries and others, there is a great appetite and a long-shared kind of underground vision in this country of how apocalyptic events will come about. And whether a given event, such as the Simpson case, fits primarily or secondarily into that, that's the kind of thing that can only be answered when you've had a full and real investigation into these matters. But all of you will probably be interested to know that as of last week in Los Angeles, the anti-terrorism unit of the LAPD, so long disgraced, the notorious unit, has now been refashioned and re-empowered.
This is a unit that had been conducting political espionage in the early 1980s on behalf of a right-wing intelligence outfit called Western Goals.
Well, exactly. There you have it. David has done the most extensive documentation of the use of computers to disseminate a list of individuals who were targeted for elimination.
By the way, one of the interesting things about the Western Goals investigation, which again, members of the LAPD counter-terrorist squad were conducting political espionage on behalf of a right-wing intelligence outfit and then putting it into computers, and some of the information was being put into a matching...
That footprint looked exactly like the bottom of his shoe, didn't it?
...computer bank in Germany.
Well, that is exactly right, and some of the people involved in the predecessor to this counterterrorism unit, which was known as the Criminal Conspiracy Section, CCS, and the Public Disorder Intelligence Division, PDID. Some of these officers are now high-ranking in the LAPD, and one of them was in charge of the crime scene at Bundy.
One of the things you mentioned, too, in your book, Death in Washington, in your book, Killing Time, Donald, is that right after the murders of Ron and Nicole, the LAPD engaged in an investigation of possible Confederates of O.J. Simpson. Their houses were staked out, bugged, surveilled, etc., and that some of the people involved in this surveillance were people who'd been involved in the COINTELPRO program in the L.A. area against the Black Panthers and others.
Well, that is exactly right. And as Stephen Worth said and Stephen Singular, this plea bargain was not the tip of the iceberg. It was the tip of the wrong iceberg. And now your discussion flows naturally from Furman back into the situation in Los Angeles and what it is they were turning away from. And
There's like 5 different pairs of thick, heavy gloves in Los Angeles. Why?
Why it is when they turned away from something, all they could see was the shadow of O.J. Simpson. Had I not made an earlier plan, I would have stayed with you, but you're all in good hands. I'll be talking to you all soon, and I thank you, and I thank the listeners.
All
Good
right.
luck, Donald.
Donald, thanks so much for participating. That concludes this interview. We have been visiting with Stephen Worth, along with Carl Jaspers, the co-author of Blood Oath, subtitled The Conspiracy to Murder Nicole Brown Simpson. That book was published in softcover by Rainbow Books and copyrighted 1996. We've also been visiting with Stephen Singular, the author of Legacy of Deception, published in softcover by Dove Books and copyrighted 1995, as well as Donald Freed, along with Raymond Briggs, the co-author of Killing Time, that published in hardcover by Macmillan and also copyrighted 1996. All 3 authors, obviously, have developed information indicating that O.J. Simpson did not commit the crimes that he is popularly supposed to have committed. There are other interviews, not as a sequential series, but rather as separate standalone entities that will, taken together, provide an incremental understanding, or a greater incremental understanding, of the facts concerning the O.J. Simpson case. Those other 2 interviews were conducted back-to-back on November 24th of 1996. All of the half-hour segments that I've been producing for about the last year and a half or so, since the early summer of 1995, as well as the interviews that I've done and the weekly One Step Beyond shows that I do, are available from a tape duplication service. The name of that tape duplication service is Spitfire. That's S-P-I-T F-I-R-E, one word. Their mailing address is P.O. Box 1179, P.O. Box 1179. That is in Ben Lomond, California. That's capital B-E-N, capital L-O-M-O-N-D. The zip code is 95005. There's also an email address, ALCALAME, that's ALCALAME, at ix.netcom.com. The address, once again, the mailing address for Spitfire, S-P-I-T-F-I-R-E, one word, P.O. Box 1179, Ben Lomond, California, capital B-E-N, capital L-O-M-O-N-D, zip code 95005. The email address is ALCALAME, one word, that's ALCALAME, at ix.netcom.com. And again, neither myself nor the station gets money out of this arrangement. I am in the process of setting up a new service to distribute the long archive shows. Those are the long radio documentaries consisting of printed information read at length into the record. Those will be available at some
It's just funny when they talk about email in 1995. It's just so good.
That little mark with the A and then the ring around it.
At?
See, that's what I said. Kay said she thought it was about.
Yeah. Oh.
But I'd never heard it.
Around.
I'd never heard it said. I'd always seen the mark, but never heard it said. And then it sounded stupid when I said it. Violence at NBC.
I heard around big fight up in the lunchroom the other week.
There it is. Violence at NBC. GE.com. I mean.
Well, Allison should know.
What is internet anyway?
Internet is that massive computer network, the one that's becoming really big now.
What do you mean? That's big. How does one? What do you write to it like mail?
No, a lot of people use it and communicate. I guess they can communicate with NBC writers and producers. Allison, can you explain what internet is?
No, she can't say anything in 10 seconds or less.
Oh, Allison will be in the studio shortly.
What
does it mean?
It's a giant computer network made up of started from.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell us what this was.
It's like a computer billboard.
It's not a. It's a computer billboard, but it's nationwide, and it's several universities and everything all joined together.
Right.
Point in the not-too-distant future from a new tape duplication service. In the meantime, people can either write to a publication that I'm in the process of starting. I can't give you any details about it because this is something I'll be getting money out of. The name of that publication is Other Means. The title is taken from the famous quote from Prussian military theoretician Karl von Clausewitz that war is the continuation of politics by other means. You can write to Other Means at P.O. Box 191710. That's Box 191710. That is in San Francisco, California, 94119-1710. You can write to them about information concerning the archive shows or, preferably, about Other Means. A more direct way of inquiring about the archive shows, which are temporarily available but not on a formal basis from a tape duplication service, is to write to me. And you can write to me, care of, by the way, my name is David, E-M-O-R-Y is the last name. You can write to me, care of, KFJCFM, that's Kangaroo, Fred John Charles FM. The address is 12345, that's 12345, El Monte Road, capital E-L, capital M-O-N-T-E Road.
It'll never last.
Los
Never.
Altos Hills, California, capital L-O-S, capital A-L-T-O-S, Hills, California, 94022. Once again, you can write to me, Dave Emery, care of KFJC-FM, 12345, El Monte Road, Los Altos Hills, California, 94022. There's also an email address that you can write to inquire about archive shows or perhaps Other Means as well. DEMORY, one word, DEMORY @well.com. That email address again, DEMORY @well.com. That concludes this half-hour segment. My name's Dave Emery. Thanks for listening. Hello, my name is Dave Emery, and it's my privilege to be presenting three authors who will be basically providing us with a different perspective on the O.J. Simpson case. First of all, we have Stephen Worth, along with Carl Jaspers, the author of Blood Oath, subtitled The Conspiracy to Murder Nicole Brown Simpson. We also have Stephen Singular, the author of Legacy of Deception. Oh, by the way, Blood Oath was published in softcover by Rainbow Books, copyrighted 1996. Again, we have Stephen Singular, the author of, among other titles, Legacy of Deception, about the O.J. Simpson case, published in softcover by Dove and copyrighted 1995. And we also have Donald Freed, the author of many titles, and along with Raymond Briggs, the co-author of Killing Time, subtitled The Full Investigation. Gentlemen, welcome once again to our airwaves.
It's always a pleasure. Good evening.
Now, there are a couple of things that I wanted to discuss about the O.J. Simpson case, so perhaps I can inject those at the end of the discussion, and some of your observations concerning the civil case can start off. This will be sort of a free-form discussion. I wondered what your reactions were to O.J. Simpson's testimony on this past Friday, and also to the media portrayal of that.
This is Steve Singular. I'd like to hear Donald talk about it. He's a lot closer to the action than I am certainly now. From my understanding, he's spent some time with the Bakers. And can you give us your update?
Yes. First of all, gentlemen, let me greet you on this week of a media storm, a kind of a new scoundrel time, not seen for some years.
Randy.
But in this period, when the media seems to have gone off the rails, whether it be the hapless officer Jewell in Atlanta, or the CIA-Contra cocaine connection, which brought the Director of Central Intelligence to no other place on earth but Watts, California, to face an angry crowd, or to Santa Monica, California, where there is a kind of lynching in the air. And I was in Santa Monica, and I was speaking on television, but I was observing. And I may say that the furore and the frenzy is such that no less than 3 columnists in the Los Angeles Times took note of what Howard Rosenberg, the media critic, called a second rush to judgment. Howard Rosenberg, Bill Boyarsky, and Peter T. King all set out on Saturday and Sunday in their columns to strike a cautionary note about the kind of minute-by-minute tracking that was going on by MSNBC and other media conglomerates. Tents and technicians dotted the landscape. A crowd was forming. Black clouds moved overhead. Rain fell intermittently. Klieg lights fizzed and smoked in the rain. It was an eerie, unnatural, and almost surreal scene. There were shouts, there were jeers, there were cheers. Vincent Bugliosi was driven from the greensward into a trailer by a part of an angry mob. It was Americana, such as not seen in a long time, while relays of reporters and lawyers from all over the country scuffled in and out from the audio room where the press listens to the trial, the overflow from the handful of seats available within the courtroom to accommodate the world press and that small number of local citizens, some of whom had been waiting since 4 a.m. in the morning in the rain to get into the what is now becoming a kind of killing zone. And lawyers would rush saying, Simpson's in trouble, he's in trouble. He clenched his fist, he swallowed, he breathed heavily, he sat back in his chair. And each element of the syntax of body language, of rhetoric, of answers was treated like a bullfight or a boxing match, except that you only heard the blows that were landed against Simpson. It was a scene of such terror and pity that eventually a young woman on court TV exclaimed that Simpson seemed vulnerable. He was at bay. Not that he was confused and not that anyone had forced him to lose his demeanor whatsoever. But nevertheless, the intensity was such. It seemed to be symbolized by the Goldmans, father and daughter, who leaned over the rail, staring in implacable vengeance at Simpson. And so it went throughout the day, with more promised for next week. Something that would have been familiar in the 1920s or the 1930s, not since the Lindbergh trial, has there been such atavism and such savagery. And so it went, with the assumption never identified that each increment of reportage was based on the assumption that Simpson was guilty, that he'd gotten away with murder, that he'd been pardoned by a jury too black and too stupid, or both, to take accountability or responsibility for justice in the criminal case, and that now it was a time for vengeance. Now it would be payback time the other way. Now Geraldo Rivera and the chorus of disapproval, the packs of the media, their day in court had come. This was no longer about Simpson, but it was about the media and the pundits and the professors and the experts who had been humiliated by predicting the wrong outcome in the criminal case. And there it was. And as a historian, I'll end on this note, I said on MSNBC, though much of it was cut for the East Coast, I have to tell you, I said, this is November 22nd, 1996, a day that should remind us that it is quite possible for a human being to be turned into a monster. This is 1965 in terms of the Kennedy assassination, and Lee Harvey Oswald has yet to be vindicated by history. And I said that just as Officer Jewell in Atlanta was forced to fit the psychological profile until his timeline saved him and returned his mother's Tupperware to her, So O.J. Simpson was now forced into the psychological profile of the battering, beating husband who must become the murderer. And I said to Mr. Gibson, I see that you turn pale when I dare to suggest that perhaps, after all, Simpson doesn't fit that profile any more than Richard Jewell fit the Mad Bomber profile. And that was about the end of my time. And I give you that now for your reaction.
Donald, before we get the reactions from the two Stevens, I wanted to read into the record a short section of Stephen Worth's book, Blood Oath, because I think it is in opposition to what you just said, and will shed a little bit of light and also some foundation for further discussion. In Chapter 5 of Blood Oath by Stephen Worth and Carl Jaspers, in Skinner's story, the plan, Skinner, the code name for the informant who spurred this book, and this this individual maintains that he was part of the actual strike team that killed Nicole and Ron, a part of a white supremacist underground group called Cause, Christian Aryan Underground Special Enforcers. In Chapter 5, we read, the plan for the anniversary celebration, that of the murder of Alan Berg, written about so effectively by Stephen Singular, the plan for the anniversary celebration consisted of a plot so sinister, so creative, so diabolical, that the outcome would provide for the embarrassment of an entire city, an entire race, and an entire nation. The plot included a well-thought-out action that would damage the U.S. judicial system forever. It would create a sense of doubt that would exist in every future trial. When we had all gathered in the farmhouse's spacious parlor, the Discoverer, that's one of the code name for another member of the team, the Discoverer continued to explain the rationale of the plan. Quote, evidence presented and testimony offered by law enforcement officers will be challenged forever from this case forward, unquote, he said. Still quoting, it's a plan designed in part to be a payback for all those responsible for actions that had been carried out against freedom-loving white supremacists, unquote. Another founder of the Cause picked up the explanation. Quote, the plan is centered around an individual easily recognized and respected among both blacks and whites. It will look like he's being framed by the authorities. The situation's designed to call upon and challenge interpersonal beliefs that every person holds. People will choose sides. Their consciences won't permit otherwise. The final coup will occur when our target is found guilty or his credibility is destroyed. This event will generate instant racial tension followed by violence. We're going to ensure that by fueling what will already be an inflamed situation. The plan will use the distrust between the authorities and the blacks that's existed in Los Angeles for years. At first, everyone will choose up sides. As the discussions become heated and clouded with rhetoric, violence will follow. After much destruction has occurred, the Cause will then step forward to take credit for the framing. But it will be painfully obvious that we couldn't have done it without the help of an easily duped, overzealous prosecution. That, by the way, by way of not only serving in opposition to your very eloquent remarks, Donald, but also to perhaps set the stage for some of the future discussion. The two Stevens, what reactions do you have to what took place on Friday and to what Donald had to say?
Well, this is Stephen Worth, and what I'd like to add is basically what's been coming out of this trial, and unfortunately because Judge Fujisaki decided not to televise it, you're getting sound bites from the media. Nobody has made mention of the 23 unidentifiable footprints that Boziak has talked about. It's kind of got lost. Nobody's talked about the cut on the right thumb of the right hand, on the glove. That's the right-hand glove.
Stephen Worth, what are these 23 footprints? Because I haven't seen any coverage of those in the media.
Well, it happens to be reported out of the trial. Now, I'm waiting. I've downloaded as much as I can as it comes down onto the Internet and been reading the testimony. There is a cut on the right-hand glove of, in fact, that came out of the testimony of the glove specialist, Rubin, who he had the glove in his hand, because everybody would always kind of dodge around it. I don't remember whether it was a cut or not a cut. They said, would you examine it? And there's a cut on there, the right thumb. Very difficult for a right-handed person to cut your right thumb. Then on the back of it, which is even more unusual, you've got cut marks on the raised braiding. Now, again, that suggests that the right hand was across the front of somebody, and somebody with a knife in their left hand did it. So, but you haven't heard anything about that. I mean, that you would think that that would be instant reporting because there's something newsworthy, because that's brand new information, never appeared out there. But what's to me even more distressing and more to following what Blood Oath is about, because it's more than just about the O.J. Simpson case. You were the first to inform me that you had heard through somebody who I checked with and verified today that Metzger, the same guy who is in our book, the same guy that was supposedly linked to the attempted bombing and burning of the first AME church, is now recommending to his people, to other people. As a matter of fact, he'll autograph my book, anybody who orders it. He's recommended two books, my book and the one by Carl Rowan, The Coming Race War in America.
Carl Rowan, a nationally syndicated columnist, by the way.
That's right. And, the Carl Rowan's book talks about Turner Diaries and a lot of these militia groups.
And he's also, by the way, Carl Rowan is also black.
That's right. Apparently, I think this starts to support what the information was provided to us. And as I've said many times, all of the information that we received via Skinner, all right, we believe there's a good deal of it. It's kind of like an enigma. It has different meanings. I mean, the blood planting, the way they said it, could have come through since they talk about Colby being the provider, and Colby could stand for three things. The person that we've isolated as a fellow by Colburn, a DNA specialist. Colby, who was out of the CIA, which is was the next door neighbor on Gretna Green of Nicole, or Colby, which is the location of the LAPD headquarters where Mark Furman came out of.
Stephen Worth, we should note for legal purposes that Tom Metzger denies any involvement in the attempt on the first AME church, although he does admit being in touch with the Fourth Reich skinheads. Go ahead.
Right. Well, what I'm going by is what's in newspaper articles that talked about him. Now, there's no definite link. I'm just curious to why he's now recommending my book. I mean, it doesn't make much sense other than they like publicity. Well, and that's written about in Turner Diaries also.
It's also written about in the passage from your book that I just read. They said, one of the questions I've always had about your book is whether perhaps this may have been exactly what Cause is described as going to do. In other words, at a certain point, getting the word out, although I also hold open the possibility that it's exactly also what Skinner said. I mean, I cannot make a definite decision, but I wonder.
Well, it's I'd like to hear from Stephan Singler what his take on what he's heard about the trial, and his take on Donald has said and what I've said.
Well, two things. First of all, as I've watched this, and it has occurred to me that I think we've moved into an arena where we're analyzing an event that never happened. At least, of course, 2 people were killed here, and I don't mean to make light of it.
This is one of the graphs that they show that we can't see. Infrared spectroscopy comparison chart. Nylon. I don't know what these mean. If it's blood or what. But they'll explain it later, and we just have to remember what we see here, I guess.
Of that. But I'm just having great difficulty getting past that. I mean, when I watch the level of analysis, the amount of time and energy and media that is devoted to this, that's what I am, from my own personal opinion, that's what I believe. I believe that people are essentially analyzing an event that never took place, which throws this into a whole other category, which
And
perhaps
another one.
Donald and...
So brown carpet fiber is the yellow line, and then brown carpet fiber is the purple line. I hope you guys remember that. Brown is the yellow, and brown is the purple.
And Dave are better equipped to analyze than I am. Number two, at the risk of being exceedingly politically incorrect, I don't think we have any concept of what went on between Nicole Simpson and O.J. Simpson. And if some people may see this male-female thing as black and white, but I'm not one of them. And I don't know what went on between these two people. I don't know who hit whom or when or where. But I am willing to believe, I do definitely, profoundly believe that it is not the black and white situation that people have made it out to be, and that's not an excuse for domestic violence or anything else. We simply don't know what happened. We have facts and absolutely no truth. And those are the two things that have been on my mind lately. I don't know how the rest of you feel about them.
Stephen Singular, you noted in Legacy of Deception the...
And now we know that the blue fiber is blue, and then the blue fiber is blue.
Seemingly impenetrable. This is something perhaps we can come back to later. The impenetrable media wall surrounding this case. You were not only actually part of the case in the sense that your book proposal actually became part of the criminal case, but also you attempted to go to various media sources. You were contacted by an anonymous informant within the L.A. legal system because of your work on the Allenberg murder, which Stephen Worth's anonymous informant says was the anniversary celebration of that was one of the motivations for this. It's astounding to me to see the way the media is covering it. The San Francisco Chronicle of Saturday, November 9th of 1996 carried some information about Werner Spitz, who was testifying concerning the forensics for the plaintiffs. Werner Spitz, by the way, was also involved with the House Select Committee on Assassinations forensic evaluation of the Kennedy assassination, as was Michael Baden. Perhaps we should remember in that regard the intelligence community has an old saying that give us the coroner, we'll control the city. One of the things I found so remarkable is that basically Spitz, as reported in, among other papers, the Chronicle of 11/9/96, was saying that the wounds on O.J. Simpson's hands were made by Nicole's fingernails. Yet, as I recall, the analysis of the tissue and blood under Nicole's fingernails indicated it wasn't O.J.'s.
Right.
That's correct.
Well, there was blood that was not O.J.'s. There, in addition to those 23 footprints, there were also 17 sets of fingerprints at the crime scene that were never identified either.
But the point is that the blood, the material under Nicole's fingernails did not come from O.J. Simpson.
I thought it was 23 sets. Come on, guys.
Well, I'll tell you what's of
Get
interest.
your conspiracy
kind of
theories
look
together.
at what's coming out of the civil. I've read 9 days of O.J. Simpson's civil testimony. It's actually his deposition. And, the Bruno Margulies is one of the things that I think Geraldo and the media played to the hilt. And they said, well, now we've got him because we've got pictures showing him wearing Bruno Margulies. And he said he would never own them. Except that's not what he said. He said he would never own those ugly-ass shoes shown in the criminal case. And he wouldn't. And he says they were purplish green. At the end of it, when they kept asking him again, they said, as of 1994, did you ever own a pair of, or do you know if you ever owned a pair of Bruno Margulies? And he said no, which clearly says he didn't know whether he owned them, whether he knew it or not. So it's not like a cut and dry thing. What bothers me the most about some of the things, because it's like an electronic lynching that's going on.
It is, Stephen. Remember that this is also an electronic proof, truth-saying situation, so we have to watch our choice of words.
Yeah, well...
It's been publicized enough that that's what O.J. said. I've seen it on the electronic media elsewhere, but we just have to keep that in mind. Please proceed.
Okay. One of the things is you've got an FBI agent paid by the federal government testifying in a civil case.
Right.
It's almost unheard of.
Right.
In order for an FBI agent to testify, he's got to get approval almost up to the director. The case also, and by the way, I'm getting the feeling that the Baker and Blazer, etc., are setting this up for an appeal based on its, they said that, you can't have double jeopardy, But this is like the state retrying its case through the civil case because it's funded in part by taxpayers' funds. The same witnesses are appearing who, if you'll notice during the case, they keep out, did you get paid? Did you send a bill in? And there hasn't been a bill that I know of yet that's been sent in to pay for these people who are on salary with the city of L.A. or the state of California. That's highly unusual. I mean, if you tried a case and said, I'd like the FBI to testify for you, they won't even talk to you.
Yes. Stephen Worth, something that you and Donald Freed both point out is that both Nicole and O.J. were getting both written and telephone death threats from white supremacist groups. Some of these were apparently delivered, according to your sources, by basically sympathetic to the cause group, LAPD people. And in the book about Cato Kalin, it's mentioned that the FBI was aware of this and told O.J. And yet, we have heard nothing about this. And in fact, Nicole, as you revealed, Donald Freed, believed she was under surveillance and actually asked O.J., she was scared because of the threats and her perception that she was under surveillance, which dovetails with what Stephen Worth was told by Skinner, and that basically she wanted O.J. to come around. Yet we've heard none of this in any of the media discussion that I've seen.
Well, remember, and this picks up where Stephen Singular left off, that you're listening to the plaintiff's case, and you're hearing a bill of attainder against O.J. Simpson. And remember, at exactly this time, before her death, Nicole Simpson was very unwell, and Mr. Simpson was bringing her soup and food and helping to care for her. What we have here is a three-dimensional relationship, as Stephen suggests. And let me get behind the dramatic scene in court, where the lights were lowered, and O.J. Simpson sat in the witness chair in shadows, while behind him and over him loomed a very large photograph of Nicole Simpson, bruised and abraded, taken sometime after the New Year's Eve confrontation of 1989. And the questions, did you ever hit her? Did you strike her? Did you kick her? Did you strangle her? Never, 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 never. That was broadcast around the world to the predictable reaction of, he must have done it. They have proof. There's the photograph. This is complete denial. This is lying of a magnitude that must include murder. Now, let me put it to you logically, gentlemen, and to your listeners. If you have an open mind, never mind the presumption of innocence or any sympathy for O.J. Simpson, but simply the dignity and self-respect of an open mind. Let me tell you what those pictures show. Remember, there's only one set of pictures. There's only one credible incident of physical contact to which O.J. Simpson pled no contest, that is to say, guilty, and took responsibility, and that is New Year's Eve, 1989. Now, what that photograph shows, and the defense may indeed boldly decide to use that photograph for Simpson rather than against him, and here's how that would work. The photograph shows scratches, bruises, abrasions, redness, and some discoloration. And that is consistent with Simpson's statement that they wrestled, he had her in an arm lock, he held her, he had to push her, he locked her out of the room, all of this as a result of a mutual physical, let us put it neutrally, a physical confrontation. He said again and again and again Friday in court, I take responsibility. I don't know how all the bruises may have occurred after I locked her out. She may have fallen, but it doesn't matter. I take responsibility. He said that over and over and over again. And only if you play that against the statements of never, never, never. Now, does the testimony make sense? Let me conclude in this way. Let me tell you what the photograph does not show. The photograph does not show that O.J. Simpson hit Nicole Simpson. Because if O.J. Simpson had ever hit Nicole Simpson, if any heavyweight athlete, and in this case one of the great world-class athletes of coordination and power and speed, who doesn't have to run anywhere to hit someone. If he's standing next to a smaller, however fierce physically and well-trained Miss Simpson may have been, she was considerably smaller and slighter. And if she was standing within range of O.J. Simpson's arm and fist, you would not be looking at a young woman with scratches and bruises. You would be looking at a smashed face.
One point we should make, Donald, because O.J. Simpson's athletic prowess has come into the arguments that he could have done it because he was such a great athlete. He certainly is still very, very strong, but he's no longer the running back he once was. He's very arthritic, as it came out in the...
yes, and that applies to... That's the killing time itself. I'm now talking about 1989. And had he hit her, you would see broken bones. Mm-hmm. You would see wires. You would see prolonged hospitalization.
You know, Donald, there's another...
Stephen Worth, I want to take...
We're still on. It didn't stop. They're just giving us a break from their stupidity, I guess.
Hello, my name is Dave Ermy, and once again, we are going to continue with our conversation with Stephen Worth, along with Carl Jaspers, the author of Blood Oath, Stephen Singular, the author of Legacy of Deception, and Donald Freed, along with Raymond Briggs, the author of Killing Time, all presenting information about the O.J. Simpson case that is at variance with what the public has been told. Stephen Worth, you, when we left off, you had a comment that you wanted to interject.
Yes. In O.J. Simpson's civil deposition, one of the... as part of it, the photograph came up. And I don't know if that's the exact photograph, because all you can do is read testimony in a deposition. But there's a claim being made in the deposition by O.J. Simpson that the photograph that he was shown in the depot was a photograph with makeup on.
That's true. That's another photograph.
Is that another photograph?
That's another one, but there is only one. There's only one incident. The assertion that there will be all sorts of witnesses and experts that will chart the course from wife abuse to murder. Don't forget, no one testified in the criminal case. Not one. And the experts in this case who never interviewed O.J. Simpson for 1 minute, of course, are not being allowed to testify. And as to the various other so-called eyewitnesses who were not credible enough for the prosecution in the criminal case, we will see if they are brought forward. But remember, the defense had and still has the authority on the world stage of this sort of abuse, and that's Dr. Lenore Walker. And she interviewed Simpson at great length. And she came away with a statement that he did not fit the pattern, there was not the momentum, he did not fit the profile.
Well, it's interesting also in that surreptitious tape of the 93 911 call, Nicole blurts out that he had not hit her in 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, there's nothing in between that 89 and 93 incident based on that. It's going to be very interesting when they start to match up what's claimed in Nicole's diary and what she states there and other incidents which they may not be able to corroborate as far as what she's stating. Because I understand there were two other things about where she claims that O.J. didn't have the kids, and O.J. was at the Brown family at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's interesting. But one other thing that's come up, and nobody is, I guess they haven't been caught it, and it deals with Donald Freed's The Killing Time in the Bronco. Detective Edwards, when he was on the stand, they asked him about, and he just answered each time because I guess he thought it didn't mean anything, whether or not, this goes back to the 85 incident, the 89 incident. And he said, was it quiet? And he said, extremely quiet. Could you hear, and this was O.J. driving away, could you hear the vehicle? And that was a Bentley, kind of a quiet vehicle. And he said, yes, you could even hear it shifting.
Really?
It's changing in speed. So that's going to set up perfectly for a scenario if someone says, why didn't Alan Park hear that vehicle?
And you know that Alan Park was asked, just as Stephen Worth has brought up, that the FBI on the stand last week revealed that there were 23 partial prints never tested and never analyzed.
In that regard, Donald, let me interrupt ever so briefly. I wanted to interject at exactly this point, and perhaps as you continue, you could incorporate this, and other, the two Stephens can incorporate this into their comments. San Francisco Examiner of Tuesday, November 5th of 1996, has an article by Laura McCoy, M-E-C-O-Y, of the Scripps McClatchy News Service, State Line, Santa Monica, headline, O.J. defense suggests dog carried evidence. And what I want to read is the way Judge Fujisaki is hearing this particular case. Skipping down, we read, Fujisaki continued Monday to block defense questions about evidence seen but not collected, and he refused to let the defense float most of its alternate theories about the killings. Fujisaki, for instance, blocked defense efforts to press Fung about his failure to collect a piece of triangular paper police photographs show between the murder victims' bodies. The defense argued at the first trial that an imprint on the piece of paper could have been the shoe print of a second killer. The judge also blocked extensive questioning about the lengthy delay in spotting a blood stain on a pair of socks found on Simpson's floor. Simpson's bedroom floor. Two other articles very quickly with regard to not only that particular aspect of Fujisaki's conduct, but the jury selection. That, by the way, the San Francisco Examiner of, once again, November 5th of 1996. The San Francisco Examiner of Monday, October 14th of this year. Simpson jury pool is weighted toward, quote, probably guilty, unquote. Subheaded, judge tended to exclude blacks who think he's innocent. Only 6% in the group believe that's likely. This is by Michael Fleeman, F-L-E-E-M-A-N of the Associated Press, State Line, Santa Monica. That again, San Francisco Examiner 10/14/96, and the San Jose Mercury News of 9/25/96. Also AP, also out of Santa Monica. Simpson judge pushes jury selection. Biased or not, potential panelists are joining the pool. And this knocked me out of my seat when I read it. Among those admitted into the jury pool by the increasingly impatient judge was a white female correspondent for Time magazine who joined the chorus of potential jurors inclined to believe Simpson guilty. There's an old rhythm and blues novelty song called Framed from the 1950s in which one of the lines says basically, the judge took out a bottle of whiskey, poured it over my head, and said to the jury, convict this man, he's drunk. You know, and it's all about a guy singing about how he was framed. And this reminds me a little bit of that novelty song, only in a much grimmer way. Gentlemen, your reactions to some of this, because this, again, in the context of evidence that was not collected, and apparently Fujisaki will not allow this to be discussed. Stephen Singular, you wrote about how Judge Ito dealt the defense setback after setback after setback.
Yeah, this guy apparently just wants to out-Ito. From what I can tell, I was very curious in pursuing Donald a little bit here, if I might, though, just because, as I said earlier,
I do not agree with that
he is
at
quite
all.
close to the action. If he can tell us anything at all about what the defense may be doing or may be planning, I realize that might be confidential information, but is it true, Donald, that you have spoken to the Bakers some recently?
Well, you know, when the plaintiffs accepted the so-called independent timeline, so that now both sides accept the same timeline, it was clear to the defense that the endgame, or the climax, of this trial would come in those last 4 minutes or so at Rockingham. And indeed, last week, Robert Baker asked the honest limousine driver, Alan Park, did you see or hear O.J. Simpson drive up? And he said no. Now, you know, they have twice asked to take the jury up to Rockingham so that jurors could stand there in the silent darkness and see or not see, just as Alan Park had. And they've been refused, and they are going to try again because Alan Park is their alibi witness, unwitting and circumstantial though his testimony may be. He is their alibi witness, and they have now, it has reached a state where last week I heard on Burden of Proof and on Geraldo, two different lawyers, one of them, Melanie Lomax, say, the timeline doesn't matter.
Right. I heard that, yeah.
That was said in essence, the timeline doesn't matter, whereas others have said, Alan Park provides the timeline to convict O.J. Simpson. So you have the most bizarre non sequiturs. going out as news.
That's like Spitz claiming that the wounds on O.J. were made by Nicole's fingernails, but the tests indicate that stuff wasn't from O.J.
Right. And that it all took place in 1 minute and 15 seconds.
Well, I'll tell you what's most disturbing about that. And by the way, I've been the footprint on the post that the defense brought in was because I had sent blow-ups. I had blown up photos to Blazer. In fact, I've been constantly forwarding information to them.
You deserve great credit because that was as big a piece of news until the 23 footprints came along.
That's right. Now, one of the things, in fact, I've got it on a website and pictures. Nicole Brown Simpson, in all of the descriptions, including American Tragedy, talks about her having her throat sliced and crumpling to the ground. The problem with that is her feet are jammed underneath a stationary lower post with scrapes and blood seeping through the scrapes on her legs on the other side and a totally swollen ankle. Now, ankles don't swell after death, which meant she had to be in that position for a while. She couldn't move. She couldn't fall that way because it jammed under there. Mm-hmm. It's not just there's also rotational marks on that leg. Now, there's no way somebody can fall. But what bothers me is Golden, Lakshmanan, nobody has written that up in the autopsy reports. Mm-hmm. Yet there is a close-up photo of her ankle over the menu. That photo shows that ankle totally swollen to the point where it's tough to even see her toes. Yet there's no mention of it. You couldn't do that and fall within that time limit that they're talking about.
Stephen Singler, you had a comment about what Donald Freed said earlier?
Well, yeah, this is a little bit different from that, but to go back to your original question about Fujisaki, why can Mark Furman not be brought into this trial? Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't the defense call him and just grill him for the first time ever?
Well, that's right. Well, you see, the judge has this latitude, he thinks, and he's stating that the LAPD are not on trial. Well, of course, this is doing real violence here to the system. And
Van Natter testified.
Yes. Well, he did because the plaintiffs brought him in.
There's an interesting thing on the subject of Mark Furman. I'd like to interject a couple of things at this point. Just reading now from the San Jose Mercury of Wednesday, January 17th of 1996, also AP out of L.A. This was after the this concerned the criminal trial. Furman was the trial, jurors write, and skipping down. Furman was the trial, Bess wrote. This is Carrie Bess, one of the jurors. Furman found the hat, Furman found the glove, Furman found the blood, Furman went over the gate, Furman did everything. When you throw it out, what case do you have? You've got reasonable doubt right before you even get to the criminalist. And then, Donald, in your book, you've written concerning Mark Furman and some of his past operations or some of his past conduct. Could a Los Angeles-based jury be predisposed to believe that police might perjure themselves or falsify or plant evidence? The Simpson trial did not exist in a vacuum. The Rodney King incident had occurred only a few years before in 1991. In fact, Furman had been one of the 45 police officers identified in the Christopher Commission report, the city's response to the Rodney King beatings.
That's true. It has been a kind of arbitrary, in the extreme set of rulings by Judge Fujisaki. And even some commentators have asked, what will history say if a victory here in the short term is based on the defense having its hands tied? Right. How will this do any honor or mean anything approaching justice?
Right.
Has anybody gotten a hold of the actual trial? It would have been a trial of Mark Furman with the state. What was contained within that? Because in speaking to somebody from the Criminal Investigation Department, they apparently said that part of the reason that he pled no contest was there was more behind that than just that single thing of I never use the N-word.
Mm-hmm. Well, indeed. Well, your book, Stephen, after all, cites the March 9th, 1995 direct examination of Detective Furman by Marcia Clark, wherein he perjures himself as to his whereabouts on the night of the murder.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about Mark Furman, which, if unless you can bring him up on the stand, you can't ask him. Mm-hmm. How much involvement, how well did he know Nicole? By the way, there's a picture, and one of the things I'm trying to do is get a hold of the color photos. There's a picture showing the hat, which that's another thing, by the way, the judge finally allowed in, that the hat and the glove may have been planted. And that's a surprise. He let that in with Lang, because that hat has absolutely no blood on it. Mm-hmm. Yet it's under a leafy plant that's covered with blood. And it's also, that glove at Bundy was never sent out for DNA testing.
Yes. Right. We mentioned this, by the way, in one of our previous interviews, Stephen. I'd like to, if at all possible, and this is not in any way to negate the importance of what you're saying, but to get to some of the things that we have not had a chance to talk about. Stephen Singular, you had a comment that you were about to make.
No, it was just a bit of a follow-up on the absence of Furman from the trial. I don't understand that at all. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that his defense could call him as a witness. If he's hostile. But they could ask the questions that now seem on the table for people who really studied the evidence. And without that, I mean, the whole thing just seems a bit hollow to me. Mm-hmm. If O.J. Simpson can be grilled, he can certainly be grilled.
It's interesting that both your anonymous source from within the legal system, Stephen Singular, and also your anonymous source who maintains he was part of the strike team, had talked about basically Nazi elements or white supremacist elements infiltrating LAPD, which is something that has been fairly well documented. One thing that, one of the many things Ito would not allow in the trial was information from LAPD personnel files or allegations by fellow officers that he was the head of a group called WASP, White Anglo-Saxon Policemen.
Going to something that's new, and by the way, I've just faxed, to Baker the same thing for him to check. If O.J. Simpson went to McDonald's to get a hamburger and came back, and Cato says he never saw him go back in the house, nobody has asked whether or not Cato remembers whether O.J. Simpson set the alarm before he left to go for the hamburgers, because that raises a very interesting question. Alan Park sees O.J. Simpson go into the house around 10:54.12, something like that. Well, in order to get into the house, if he had not been in there before, he would have had to.
Well, there we go. We saw all the crime scene pieces of evidence, the photos of them. So that was our field trip today. We took a field trip. We saw all the pieces of evidence, and if we have to, we can go back to them when they're talking about it. If we get really confused, we can just go back to this video and pull it up and see it for ourselves. Like, I'm really confused about how the glove got behind Cato's house. It's just, like, I don't get it. I don't understand. But it was there, so there's that. Thank you guys so much for coming out today. We're going right back to the trial tomorrow. Don't worry. I just felt like we had to see the evidence if we're going to do this right. I hope you guys have a great, great, great Friday. And I will see you again real soon. Bye, guys.